I guess a little bit of a change of tack now, because I've got no pictures of birds and bees and hedgehogs and, in fact, no pictures of trees either, I'm afraid. I'm Kirsten Henson. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about London's Blue Ribbon Network. As a sustainable construction consultant, one of the big issues, James mentioned it actually, about the air quality, and the first port of call is to reduce the sources of poor air quality in our streets. And of course, one of the greatest opportunities there, perhaps, is to remove some of the heavy goods vehicles from our streets that are delivering essential construction products, and not just construction products, but also food products, etc., taking waste out, particularly in our inner city areas. So we've done recently a little bit of work on the Blue Ribbon Network. If you're unsure of what that is, it's actually the London Strategic Water Network, and the map up there that you'll see, the network is extensive and it extends to every single London borough, and it really forms part of the capital's picturesque character, as well as supporting a lot of the biodiversity and those opportunities that we're hearing about that you can create in your own garden. One of the biggest challenges, as with a lot of our green and blue infrastructure, is that it's in decline. So I guess what can we do about it? And I think, for me, the sad thing is there's a reason why we've got this wonderful historic canal network, blue network, and it is to transport goods. And we just don't utilise it for such things anymore, certainly not really beyond the mainstream of the River Thames. So I just want to spend a little bit of time sort of talking about some of the benefits of the network, some of the challenges, and of course some of the opportunities as well, because we haven't quite got this one sussed yet. If we have a look at the benefits of water transportation, one of the biggest issues with transport, and actually one of the biggest issues with sustainability, is we externalise a lot of the costs associated with a service or a product, i.e. we don't pay for them. So, for example, when I have my Ocado delivery in its HGV arriving, I'm not paying any more than the cost of the maintenance of that vehicle and the driver. That's what I think is about £5 now to have your shopping delivered, or something like that. That's essentially what your £5 is covering. What it's not paying for is the cost of congestion. It's not paying for the fact that if you have a look at accident rates in our inner cities with pedestrians and pedestrians and cyclists, majority are happening with HGVs, buses, bin lorries, those sorts of things. Noise, the cost of noise. This is actually really quite interesting. The traffic noise is heavily linked with depression, and the cost of depression to our National Health Service and treating depression is actually quite extensive. So we're able to assign a socio-economic pounds and pence cost to HGVs using our public roads. Climate change costs, so things like carbon. Air pollution is another one, respiratory disorders, etc. We're all, I guess, somebody is paying for the cost of that, because it's our National Health Service that's treating some of these diseases that are resulting in, or some of these illnesses that are resulting in from our clogged inner city roads. The infrastructure costs, the maintenance of the infrastructure, the actual building of the roads, the dealing with potholes, although many of you might believe that potholes aren't dealt with. And I'm a cyclist, and I can tell you potholes really aren't dealt with, a little bit dangerous. But there's other costs such as visual intrusion, landscape, community severance. Now, we do pay taxation regimes, obviously, but if you have a look at, this is actually the numbers there that you see are Department for Transport numbers, so they've done all of this analysis to assign a pounds and pence cost to each of those externalities. But of course there is taxation, but what you'll notice, that line at the bottom, the negative, the taxation isn't sufficient to cover the externalities associated with road traffic. The reason why the Department for Transport went through this whole scenario is that there was an offer of grants for suppliers that wanted to explore rail or water distribution options and solutions for their product or services. So the idea being that you could do the calculation to demonstrate what the social economic value was by removing heavy goods vehicles off roads. We still use these numbers to try and engage people to understand what that cost of road distribution and road transportation is, and to challenge perhaps where some of the benefits might be and how far do you have to be bringing things in what size vehicles, in what size freight trains, etc., etc. Some of the challenges of water transportation, I don't know whether you recognise the photo in the corner there. That's actually early days of the London Olympic Park. And we sort of had a target there to have 50% transportation, sustainable transportation of goods and materials, because we realised we had a logistical problem, one vehicle every 3 seconds arriving into that park at peak times. By bringing stuff in by rail, by bringing stuff in by water, one every 6 seconds. I should say by water very, very quietly, because actually when we look at the statistics, yes, we achieved the 50% target, but there was probably a handful of barges that went in and out of the London Olympic Park site carrying waste, carrying rebar cages. We trialled with aggregates. And although the Olympic Park is not far from the main Thames, there's a number of locks to get through. It increases complexity and travel times. And actually that increases the cost as well of water distribution. So we were finding that actually the longer travel durations was making it very expensive. There's navigation was an issue. The Aquatic Centre tried to have some aggregates delivered, but somebody hadn't told them that the river hadn't been dredged there, and so the boat ran aground. And I've got aggregates over there, I need them over here. The boat's in the middle of the river, stuck. So all of these sort of issues, I think there's partly a lack of awareness around sort of some of these issues and challenges. And while sometimes we think there's a great intention to use water transportation, at the moment, because it's not been maintained, because it's not something that we're familiar with, it's a bit of a pie-in-the-sky dream, I think, at the moment. We have a lack of public wharfs with cargo handling abilities. The issue with transportation to and from wharves, that's double handling, it adds carbon. Sometimes I may have to have a product that's transported 10 kilometres by road before it gets to the nearest wharf. Then it comes down a river, and then I've got to transport it again, potentially by road, to get to its final destination. So the additional logistics cost often outweighs those socio-economic costs that we've seen when you're going away from that central River Thames. I'm not going to take away the River Thames. The River Thames is absolutely superb. We actually about 50% of London's annual aggregate demand comes in by water. And that's a lot of the concrete aggregates. It's a really valuable resource for us. So that main artery works really well at the moment. It's the distribution into the wider London area that's a challenge. There's 12 active wharfs on the Thames. They're all operating at about 80% capacity. So this idea of us sort of going out there and delivering more materials and using our wharves and our waterways, there's actually a lack of capacity in the system. There's not a great potential for growth there. There's been some great success stories, but again, you'll notice Thames Tideway, Crossrail. Thames Tideway is the big super sewer right next door to the Thames. I mean, if they weren't using barge to take their tunnel risings away, you'd have to scratch your head and really seriously challenge that project. Crossrail had the same problems as we did, and you sort of, again, great to ship things out by barge, but you still had to take it from the tunnel drive sites through the London streets to get to the river in the first place. So, perhaps there are other bulk materials that we can use, but at the moment our transportation, the blue network is predominantly used for those bulk materials, muck away from our big tunnelling projects and concrete aggregates. So if we've only got 12 active wharves operating already at 80% capacity, we might sort of say, well, there's an issue here. But I think one of the biggest issues, this is the Greenwich Wharf, and it's one of the busiest around. And what you'll notice, and I think we notice it in London, is development is encroaching. And we see it with our strategic railheads that bring materials into London, and we're seeing it with our wharves as well. I don't know whether, it's probably not terribly clear. I'll come over and point it out to you in the middle picture. But the middle picture, you can just about see the Greenwich Wharf site, and you'll see the new residential housing that the council has allowed to go up by it. would it surprise you to know that people that have bought those houses, knowing full well that the operational wharf was there, have started complaining about noise and dust? That, I was going to use an expletive there, that annoys me greatly. Partly because it's such a fundamental resource. We need to bring construction materials into London. We need to bring them by sustainable transport means. And yes, we need housing. But why, number one, has the local authority allowed the housing to be built so close? And number two, nobody hid that wharf from people when they were buying the properties. It's fairly obvious it's there. So the ability now, the wharves are being really, really pressured on the times that they're allowed to operate, on how they operate. They're being constrained because of the development that has been permitted around it. And we're seeing this more and more across our London wharves and the railheads, as I see. And I think there is a genuine lack of public awareness. People sort of think, get the HGVs off the road. That's great. But do you want new housing? Do you want a new hospital? Do you want your roads to be maintained? Do you need a new school? Because if you do, we need aggregates, we need concrete, we need steel, we need timber, we need all of these products to come into London. And unfortunately, they can't arrive at 5 o'clock in the morning. Because actually, as you've seen with the Olympic Park, one HGV every 3 seconds. You try and shoehorn that into a very early morning delivery period. It just simply doesn't work when we're talking about the large-scale construction that we need in the UK. And there's a lack of investment, I think, in some of our critical blue infrastructure, which I would like to see reversed. I'm not entirely sure what my conclusions are, except that I'm a little bit frustrated that we don't recognise the value of those sustainable transport networks that we do have. That we don't genuinely really sort of challenge and push the way that development is happening so that we are able to protect some of our key infrastructure assets. And, you know, as an informed public here, please do engage with the fact that the blue waterways aren't just potentially there for otters, for kingfishers, for wildlife, but they are a very good opportunity to improve the inner city air quality in some of our areas by taking heavy goods vehicles off the roads. Thank you very much.